When Amelie turned 15, everything about her life changed. In her small hometown of Mbabane, Eswatini, people stopped looking at her the same way. Whenever she entered a room, conversations would pause. Her aunt would whisper loud enough for everyone to hear, "That girl, she's the shame of the family." Amelie never understood how she could be the shame when she was the one who had been hurt. The truth was cruel and hidden. A neighbor had assaulted her, but instead of standing by her, her parents, Bongani and Lindai, pretended it never happened. They told everyone Amelie had misbehaved, that she was a bad example. The baby growing inside her became proof of a lie, one her parents used to protect their pride. Amelie begged them to believe her, but her words only made things worse. Her father's voice would thunder through the house, calling her ungrateful, while her mother avoided her eyes. Finally, they decided she had brought enough disgrace on the family. They sent her away to live with her grandmother in a distant village, saying she needed discipline. The village was quiet, and so was Amelie. Her grandmother tried to be kind, but even there, people whispered. She stopped correcting them. She stopped defending herself. At 15, Amelie learned that silence could protect her better than truth ever had. She would often sit outside at night, watching the stars, wondering how a single moment could change everything. She promised herself one thing. One day she would leave this place, and when she did, no one would ever call her shame again. 3 years had passed since Amelie was sent away. Life in the village had become a slow, lonely routine. Her grandmother, the only person who showed her real kindness, had passed on, leaving Amelie completely alone with her little boy, Cabello. He was just 3 years old, bright-eyed, curious, and full of questions she didn't always know how to answer. Every time she looked at him, she felt both pain and hope. He was a reminder of what she had lost, but also of what she still had left to fight for. The people in the village never forgot her past. They greeted her with tight smiles, but their whispers always followed her home. "That's the girl who brought shame," they'd say. Even the church women, who preached forgiveness, made her sit at the back during services. She tried to ignore it, but some nights she cried quietly so Cabello wouldn't hear. Her parents never visited. Once in a while, her mother would call, but never to ask how she was. Instead, she'd say things like, "You've made your bed, Amelie. Now lie in it." Those words cut deeper each time. Then one evening, as Amelie was washing clothes by the river, Cabello came running up to her, his small hands full of wildflowers. "Mama, let's go live somewhere else," he said, smiling. It sounded like a child's dream, but to Amelie, it felt like a sign. That night, after everyone in the village had gone to sleep, she quietly packed a small bag, 2 sets of clothes, a photo of her grandmother, and the last 80 rand she had hidden under her mattress. She lifted Cabello from his bed, wrapped him in a blanket, and whispered, "We're leaving, my boy. It's time." They walked through the dark until they reached the bus stop on the main road. The bus to Johannesburg arrived just before dawn, its headlights cutting through the mist. Amelie hesitated for a moment, holding Cabello close. She had never been to the city. She didn't know anyone there, but she knew staying meant dying slowly in silence. The ride was long. Cabello slept most of the way, his head resting on her lap. Amelie stared out the window as the village faded into the distance. She thought about all the things people had said about her, all the labels they'd given her. Shame, disgrace, failure. She decided she would leave every one of those names behind on that dusty road. When the bus finally stopped in Johannesburg, the city greeted her with chaos, honking taxis, shouting vendors, and streets full of people moving fast. It was nothing like the quiet hills she came from, but something about it felt alive, full of possibility. Standing at the terminal, clutching Cabello's hand, Amelie took a deep breath. She had no family, no job, and barely enough money for food. But she had something new, freedom. She knelt down to her son's level and said softly, "We'll be okay, Cabello. This is where our new life starts." And with that, they stepped into the crowd, 2 small figures in a big, unfamiliar city, carrying nothing but courage, hope, and the dream of a better tomorrow. Johannesburg was nothing like Amelie imagined. The city moved fast, loud, and unforgiving. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry, chasing something, money, dreams, or survival. For Amelie, it was all 3. She and Cabello stayed in a small room behind a spaza shop, just big enough for a mattress and a few bags. The rent took almost everything she earned, but at least it was theirs. Finding work wasn't easy. She went from door to door, asking if anyone needed help. Most people ignored her, some turned her away. Eventually, she started cleaning offices during the day and washing clothes for families in the neighborhood on weekends. The pay was little, but she refused to give up. On some mornings, she sold vegetables at the taxi rank, shouting prices over the noise of traffic. Her hands were always tired, but her spirit refused to break. There were nights when the cupboards were empty. Cabello would ask for dinner, and Amelie would smile and say, "Let's pretend we're having a feast," then tell him stories until he fell asleep. After he slept, she'd sit in the dark, her stomach growling, wondering how long they could keep going like this. But every night, before she closed her eyes, she whispered to herself, "We'll be okay. One day, they'll see what we became." Emily didn't just want to survive, she wanted to change her life. When she wasn't working, she borrowed a friend's old phone to study online. She watched free videos on how to start a small business, how to save money, and how to market products. Most of the time, the connection was bad, but she kept trying. She wrote down everything she learned in an old notebook, the pages filled with her handwriting and dreams. Her favorite part of the day was walking Cabello to school. He would hold her hand tightly and talk about becoming a pilot or a doctor. Hearing him dream reminded her why she couldn't stop. He deserved a life far better than the one she had known. There were moments when she almost gave up, days when the bus didn't come, or when her employer shouted at her for being too slow. But she always pushed through. She reminded herself that she had already survived worse. The city might be hard, but it wasn't cruel like silence had been. One afternoon, while cleaning an office, she saw a motivational quote printed on a mug. "Your struggle is your strength." She smiled quietly to herself. That was exactly what she was living. Emily didn't have much, but she had grit. Every small victory, a full meal, a paid rent, a smiling Cabello, felt like a step forward. She was building something invisible but powerful, a future. In a city that didn't care who she was or where she came from, Emily found her strength. Her resilience became her rebellion, the quiet, steady kind that doesn't shout but keeps going, no matter what. Years went by, and Emily's life slowly began to change. She was no longer the scared young girl who arrived in Johannesburg with nothing but hope and 80 rand. Cabello was now in school, growing fast and always hungry, just like the dreams Emily carried. She was still working as a cleaner, but one of her part-time jobs at a small cafe would soon change everything. The cafe owner, Mr. Dlamini, was a kind man who treated his staff with respect. He often noticed how carefully Emily worked, how she always went the extra mile to make customers feel welcome, even though it wasn't part of her job. One afternoon, as she wiped down the tables, he said, "You've got ideas, Emily. You always find ways to make things better here. Have you ever thought about starting your own thing?" She laughed softly. "Maybe someday," she said, not really believing it. "I wouldn't even know where to start." But Mr. Dlamini didn't forget that conversation. A few weeks later, he called her into his office and handed her an envelope. Inside was a small loan, enough to buy ingredients and a few supplies. "You remind me of myself when I started," he said. "Use this to begin something of your own. I trust you'll make it work." Emily couldn't believe it. That night, she stayed up baking in her tiny kitchen. She made the pastries her grandmother used to teach her: golden fete cooks, soft buns filled with jam, and flaky pies that smelled like home. The next morning, she set up a small table at a busy street corner near a taxi rank. She didn't even have a proper sign, just a handwritten piece of cardboard that said fresh pastries. By noon, everything was gone. She couldn't believe how fast people came back from. Some even brought friends, saying, "You have to try that pastry girl's food. It tastes like love." That became her reputation. People didn't just come for the pastries, they came for her warmth, her smile, the way she remembered their names. Every rand she earned went into buying more ingredients. Soon, she had a small crowd waiting for her every morning before she even opened. When Mr. Dlamini stopped by one day to check on her, he smiled proudly. "You're doing it, Emily," he said. She grinned, her hands dusted with flour. "I guess someday came sooner than I thought." She decided to give her stall a name, Sweet Redemption. To her, it wasn't just about pastries. It was about taking something painful and turning it into something beautiful. Each day she sold out faster than the last. Her little table turned into a stand, and her stand began to draw loyal customers from all around the neighborhood. Emily didn't have much, but she finally had a piece of herself back, a reason to believe that her story wasn't one of shame anymore. It was one of strength, sweetness, and second chances. 2 years after Emily started selling pastries on the street, her life looked completely different. What began as a small stand with a cardboard sign had grown into something real, something she had built with her own hands. Her customers kept coming back, bringing friends and family, and soon people were asking if she could bake for birthdays, office events, even weddings. With the help of Mr. Dlamini's advice and a few loyal customers who believed in her, Emily saved enough to rent a tiny shop space. It became the first Sweet Redemption bakery. The first day she opened the doors, she stood outside for a moment, staring at the bright sign with her bakery's name printed in bold letters. She smiled, remembering all the times people had called her shame. Now, her name stood proudly above a place that smelled like sugar, butter, and hard work. Business grew faster than she imagined. Her pastries became known across the neighborhood, then across the city. People said her food had heart. Within a year, she opened a second bakery on the other side of Johannesburg. She hired women who, like her, had struggled to find work, single mothers, young girls with stories no one cared to listen to. To them, Amelie wasn't just a boss. She was a symbol of what was possible. By the time Cabello turned 10, Sweet Redemption had become a small brand with delivery contracts for local cafes and offices. Amelie had gone from cleaning floors to owning a business that people respected. She moved out of the cramped backroom and bought a modest house in a quiet suburb. For the first time, she had a front door that locked properly, a small garden where Cabello could play, and a sense of peace she hadn't known since childhood. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise to prepare deliveries, and every evening, she helped Cabello with his homework. When he was accepted into one of Johannesburg's best schools, she cried quietly in her car before picking him up. It felt like everything she had suffered was finally turning into something good. But success didn't erase the past, it only covered it up. Some nights, when the bakery lights were off and the city grew quiet, she still thought about her family back in Mbabane. She wondered if they ever missed her, or if they still whispered her name like a curse. She told herself it didn't matter. She had built a life on her own, and that was enough. Then one evening, while scrolling through her phone after closing the bakery, a notification popped up on Facebook. It was a message from her younger sister, Nombula, a name she hadn't seen in more than a decade. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "Mom is sick," the message read. "Please come home." Amelie sat frozen, staring at the screen. The memories she had buried deep began to surface all at once. The whispers, the shame, the betrayal. She had worked so hard to leave it all behind. But now it was calling her back. And for the first time in years, she didn't know what to do. Amelie sat staring at the message for a long time. Her hands shook as memories flooded back. Her father's cold eyes, her mother's silence, the whispers that followed her everywhere. 12 years had passed without a single word from, and now, suddenly, they wanted her to come home. She didn't know how to feel. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to protect the peace she had finally found. But deep down, something in her heart whispered that she needed to go, not for them, but for herself. The next morning, she packed a small bag and told Cabello, "We're going to Mbabane." He didn't know much about her past, only that his mother had left home young and never gone back. He nodded quietly, sensing the heaviness in her voice. The drive was long and quiet. As the car rolled through the hills and into the town she once called home, Amelie's chest tightened. Nothing had changed, the same dusty roads, the same market stalls, the same curious eyes following strangers. But when people recognized her, the whispers began again. Only this time, Amelie didn't lower her head. She kept walking, holding Cabello's hand proudly. Her parents' house looked almost the same as when she left, cracked walls, fading paint, the same big tree in the yard where she used to play as a child. Standing at the gate, she hesitated, her heart pounding. Cabello squeezed her hand and said softly, "It's okay, Mama. I'm with you." She took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened to reveal her younger sister, Nombula, now grown. Her eyes filled with tears. "You came," she said. Inside, the house was quiet and dim. The smell of medicine hung in the air. Amelie's mother lay in bed, her body frail and her face pale. When their eyes met, Amelie saw something she had never seen before: guilt. Real, heavy guilt. "Ma," she said softly, sitting beside her. Her mother's lips trembled. "Amelie," her voice was weak. "You look so strong." Before Amelie could reply, her father entered the room. He looked older but still carried the same stern expression. His voice was cold. "Why did you come back after all these years?" Amelie stood up slowly and met his eyes. "Because I'm not the shame you made me out to be," she said quietly. "I came to say goodbye properly, if this is the end." The room went silent. For once, her father had nothing to say. He just looked at her, maybe realizing that the little girl he had sent away had grown into a woman who no longer feared him. That night, Amelie sat by her mother's bedside, holding her hand. She didn't cry. She had cried enough in this house before. She just sat there, feeling both the pain of the past and the peace of knowing she had faced it. Outside, the moonlight spilled through the window, and Amelie finally understood. Sometimes going back isn't about seeking forgiveness. It's about showing that you survived without it. Dinner that night was tense from the moment Amelie sat down. The table was the same one she had eaten at as a child, but everything felt different now. Cabello sat quietly beside her, sensing the heavy silence that filled the room. Her mother barely touched her food, and Nombula kept her eyes down. Her father, on the other hand, sat tall at the head of the table, still holding on to the authority he had always used to control everyone. He cleared his throat and began in that same stern voice Amelie remembered too well. "You should have stayed where you were," he said. "At least then people wouldn't have to talk about you again. You've embarrassed this family enough." Amelie felt her stomach tighten, but this time, she didn't look away. Years of swallowed pain began to rise inside her. She had built her own life, fought her own battles, and now here he was, still trying to make her small. She put down her fork and looked directly at him. "Do you even know who hurt me that night?" she asked quietly. The room went still. Even the sound of the clock on the wall seemed to stop. Her father frowned, pretending not to understand. "What are you talking about?" Amelie's voice didn't shake. "It was your business partner," she said, her tone calm but heavy. "The man you defended when I begged you to believe me. The one you said would never do such a thing." Her mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Bongani," she whispered, turning to him. "Is this true?" Her father's face turned pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted away from hers, his confidence crumbling for the first time. Amelie felt tears burn in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You called me a liar," she continued softly. "You let everyone believe I was the one who brought shame to this family. But the truth is, you protected the man who destroyed your own daughter's life." Her mother began to cry, her shoulders shaking. "I didn't know," she kept repeating. "Amelie, I didn't know." Amelie looked at her, her heart breaking all over again. "You didn't want to know, Ma. It was easier to pretend." The weight of her words hung in the air like smoke. Her father sat frozen, staring at his plate, his pride collapsing under the truth he could no longer hide. For the first time in years, Amelie didn't feel small in that house. She didn't feel like the broken girl they sent away. She felt strong, strong enough to face them, strong enough to speak the truth that had been buried for too long. She stood up, her voice calm but firm. "You thought hiding me would protect your honor, but all it did was expose your guilt." Then she turned to Cabello and said softly, "Let's go, my boy." As they walked out, the house behind her filled with silence. This time, not the silence of fear, but the silence of truth finally being heard. By the next morning, Mbabane was buzzing with whispers. Word had spread fast. People were no longer talking about Amelie's shame. They were talking about the truth. The man her father had defended all those years ago, his trusted business partner, had finally been exposed. Other women started coming forward too, sharing their stories and filing charges. What Amelie had carried alone for so long was no longer her secret to bear. The silence that once protected her abuser had finally broken. Amelie watched it all unfold quietly. As she walked through the market that morning, she could feel people staring at her again. But this time, their eyes held something different. Some looked guilty. Others looked sorry. The same women who once gossiped about her now turned away in shame. A few even came up to her, whispering apologies. "We didn't know," they said. She simply nodded. There was no anger left in her, only relief. For years, she had carried a truth too heavy for one person. Now it was out in the open, and the weight that had crushed her spirit was gone. Back at her parents' house, her mother lay awake in bed, tears streaming down her face. Amelie sat beside her quietly for a while, neither of them speaking. Her mother finally reached out a trembling hand and whispered, "I'm sorry, my child. I should have believed you." Amelie took her hand gently. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "I just hope you find peace." That evening, as the sun began to set behind the hills, Amelie packed her things. She had come full circle, from being sent away in shame to returning as a woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing. There was nothing left for her here but closure. Before leaving, she wrote a short letter and placed it on her mother's bedside table. It read, "You called me shame, but I carried yours. I forgive you. I hope you heal." She kissed her mother's forehead one last time and walked out of the house with Cabello by her side. Her father didn't come out to see her off. Maybe he couldn't face her, or maybe he finally realized what his silence had cost. Either way, Amelie no longer needed his approval. As they drove away, the town grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. The air felt lighter. Cabello looked out the window and asked, "Mama, are we going home now?" Amelie smiled, her eyes fixed on the open road ahead. "Yes, baby," she said softly. Home. For the first time in her life, she truly felt free, not because the world had changed, but because she had. She had spoken her truth, faced her past, and walked away with her head held high. The girl who once left Mbabane in silence was now leaving it in strength. A year after returning from Mbabane, Amelie's life looked nothing like the one she had left behind. Sweet Redemption wasn't just a small bakery anymore. It had grown into one of the most loved bakery chains in Gauteng. Her pastries were now sold in cafes, grocery stores, and even corporate offices. Her face, once hidden in shame, was now known across the city as the woman who turned pain into purpose. Every morning, her shops filled with the smell of fresh bread and warm laughter. Her employees, most of them women who had once struggled like she did, called her boss lady with pride. She made sure everyone who worked for her felt seen, respected, and capable of more. She often told them, "We don't just bake, we rise." One day, Amelie received an email from a popular lifestyle magazine. They wanted to feature her story in their Women Who Inspire issue. When the interviewer arrived, Amelie was nervous but excited. She sat in her office, now decorated with flowers and photos of her and Cabello, as the camera crew set up their lights. The journalist smiled and asked, "You were once homeless. You faced things most people couldn't survive. What kept you going?" Amelie thought for a moment before answering. Her voice was calm but full of emotion. "The belief that I was never what they said I was," she said. "Sometimes walking away is the only way to reclaim your name. I walked away so I could build something new, for me and for my son." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had lived through. When the interview was published, her photo was on the front cover, Amelie, standing proudly in her bakery, wearing her white apron and her brightest smile. The headline read, "From Shame to Sweet Success." That evening, Amelie framed the magazine cover and hung it in her office. As she looked at it, she felt a quiet pride rise in her chest. This was proof that no matter how deep she had fallen, she had found her way back up. Cabello, now 11, walked in holding a slice of cake. He stopped in front of the framed cover and smiled. "You did it, Mama," he said, his voice full of admiration. Amelie turned to him, her eyes soft and full of love. "No, baby," she said, hugging him tightly. "We did." For a long moment they stood there, mother and son, wrapped in the kind of peace she once thought she'd never know. Later that night, as she closed the bakery, Amelie looked out at the city lights. She thought about the girl she once was, the one who had boarded a bus with nothing but courage and hope. That girl had survived, fought, and built an empire out of silence. Now the world finally knew her story. But most importantly, she had rewritten it herself. 2 years later, on a quiet Monday morning, Amelie found an envelope in her mailbox. The handwriting on it was shaky but familiar. It was from her father. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at it, unsure if she even wanted to open it. Then she took a deep breath, walked into her office, and sat down at her desk. Inside was a short letter. The first line made her heart skip. "I'm sorry. I told everyone the truth. I was wrong." There was more. Apologies she had waited a lifetime to hear. Words that might have once made her cry. But now she didn't feel tears coming. She didn't feel anger either. Just peace. After everything she had endured, she no longer needed his approval to feel whole. Amelie folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer of her desk. She looked up and glanced through the glass window of her bakery. The morning rush had begun, customers laughing, the smell of coffee and fresh bread filling the air, her employees moving with pride and purpose. This was her world now. She smiled to herself, not out of pride but out of gratitude, for every painful lesson, every lonely night, and every small victory that brought her here. Sometimes, leaving without saying goodbye isn't about running away. It's about choosing yourself, walking your own path, and returning on your own terms, when the world can finally see who you've become. The girl they once called shame had turned silence into strength. And in the end, her success spoke louder than any revenge ever could.